I think what often happens is I get a song to a certain point where I've got the riffs, I've got maybe a little solo, I've got the bass, I've got the beat, but then I'm like, it's kind of missing that like sort of catchy, like something that really kind of makes it its own, like makes it something sort of memorable, maybe on top of all those things I've made. And then I often hear a sound, or I'm like, I probably would have been like thinking some monk chanting thing would have been great over this, and then just looked it up on YouTube and maybe found something. What I would do is have the sort of similarly actually to what I was saying earlier with the bass, I would have the song looping, and I might just go exploring on the internet whilst the song's looping in the background, just start playing little videos, things I find, and then see, and then, you know, something, the music will hit and the video thing's making it sound, and then if both of them, I kind of can hear that that's like the thing I'm looking for, you know? It's like this moment where it syncs up and you're like, that's it. That's the thing right there.
You're listening to the Freio Music Podcast. To the Freio Music Podcast.
I'm Josh Vanderway, is my full name, and I perform as Nomadic.
Excellent. And where are you based out of?
Wellington, New Zealand at the moment.
Are you from there?
Yeah, it gets a little more complicated. I grew up in Amsterdam. That's where I'm originally from. But I moved to an area in New Zealand called Golden Bay when I was a kid, and I've moved to Wellington since then.
Yeah. Nice. And how old were you when you moved away from Amsterdam?
10. I did live there again for about 4 years, from the age of like 20 to 24.
Do you think that influenced you musically? Like, do you have a lot of musical memories from Amsterdam as a kid, or where did you start getting into music? Where was that origin for you?
Funnily enough, it did actually, I feel like my passion for music did originate in Amsterdam, but it was actually when coming to visit there, maybe a few years after I'd left, and I was about 12 or 13, and I first picked up a guitar, and one of my mom's friends taught me how to play it, and I just got super obsessed with it. And I also think my parents, we did a lot of traveling when I was a kid. Like, my parents were kind of, nomad hippie types, and they would take us out of school for 6 months, and we would just go to Indonesia and India. I went to India a lot as a kid as well, so I feel like that exposed me to a lot of world music sounds as well. We would have it blasting in the car and stuff like that.
That's amazing. So 6-month adventure, how did that feel as a kid? Did it feel like you were moving? Like, was that forever, or is this like summer break is going to be awesome? Or is like, obviously it's more than summer break, 6 months.
I liked to not go to school, so that was cool. And we I loved it. I had a brother, I have a younger sibling, so I would always have someone to play with and run around and just get wild, and we would run around like sword fighting and shit. Heaps of fun.
As a kid, being able to experience these various cultures and blasted music and hearing new languages, new sounds, instruments, did you start realizing during those travels that you were interested in music, or you're going to incorporate that later on?
I don't think back then. Back then, I did like music. I always had a Walkman with me and would be listening to my own CDs and trying to share them with my parents, but they had their own music they would prefer. I was really into hip hop, like Snoop Dogg and 50 Cent and all that stuff. But no, it wasn't until I was around the age of 12, I think, when someone showed me how to play Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple on acoustic. And I don't know, something just clicked about playing the instrument, like how it worked, the sounds. And I think it was more from that moment that I could see it evolving into something. In hindsight, those experiences did have an influence on my music now for sure. Like I feel like my ear does resonate with certain sounds, but I just wouldn't have realized that back then, I don't think.
Yeah, for sure. And you can never really know where things are going to go in the future, but looking back, it's easier to see, oh, I took that from this location.
Exactly. Yeah.
And once you learned that Deep Purple, that was a breakthrough moment for you because you realized that you could make music.
Yeah. And it was around the same time as discovering Nirvana and like just discovering like bands, Led Zeppelin, and like just suddenly having just nerding out with my mates and going like, like not only the musical aspect, but like going onto YouTube and looking up interviews with these bands and being like, these were some really cool people and sort of getting really inspired by it. That definitely set me on a bit of a musical journey, I think.
Awesome. Now full circle, you're on the music interview. You're the musician being interviewed. Yeah. So there might be a kid out there watching this someday in the future.
That's awesome.
Now, what was it, out of curiosity, about those interviews that really spoke to you or interested you? Were they, backstage shots, or was it being on stage, or was it just the style or their approach?
I think energy? it was a little bit of everything. Like I really liked so I was quite a rebellious teenager as well. So I feel like the sort of anarchist view of like grunge and bands and a lot of bands in that time really resonated. Their attitude, as well as just the being on stage, the adventure, the showmanship of seeing like Robert Plant performing on stage. It was just everything about it. I became like quite obsessed with it and wanted my mom to buy me, I need this new guitar, I need this. And then it sort of transformed into, forming my own bands, things like that as well.
And when did you transition to start taking music more seriously? So initially you learned it Deep Purple, you learned how to cover music, but when did you start realizing that you can use your instruments and your craft to explore the unknown or to create something that has yet to be done?
Yeah, I think originally, it was more doing covers. Like I got very into, there was this sort of scene on YouTube, early YouTube days, where you would try and learn like really complicated songs and then post videos of you doing the cover. And I got really into that. I had like a YouTube channel, which still gets like, some of the videos have like hundreds of thousands of views now, which is quite funny to look back on. But it's me just like playing really, really fast, like just memorizing like solos and different riffs and stuff like that. But then from that, the transition, I think it was mainly forming a band. Like I wasn't really writing songs solo, but I had some friends and we wanted to compete in RockQuest, which was a sort of local battle of the bands competition. That would be like all over the country, different towns would like have the show, and then the top band from each region would then play together in another region. And we used to enter in that multiple years, and you had to make original music as well. So yeah, we just started. I had a few mates. I was writing lyrics. I was very motivated at that time. To looking back on it, I was always the one, sort of rustling my mates together, like, "Hey, come on, band practice, guys!" And was definitely the sort of the motivated one. Um, but yeah, I think that was the start of it, was the band, was doing the band thing.
So once you started doing that, getting your buddies involved, now it becomes a collaborative thing. There's some accountability. You're like showing up for each other. It's clear who's, holding up the group and who's pushing the group forward. When did you start producing music through the computer or utilizing electronic instruments?
Yeah, so I it was pretty funny at that. So I played with this band from around the age of 13 to maybe 17, and we were called Holy Fingers, by the way, and we would go to, performing at different local events and things. And at that time, I was quite a instrumental purist, I would say. Like, I was one of those snobby kind of like, making music with computers, that's not, that's not real. Or I had this sort of outlook on it. And then I think I went to a few, we call them bush doofs over here, but like basically raves in the forest. And they would play like some pretty hardcore drum and bass, and dubs. It was like around 2010s probably. So it was when like dubstep and artists like Rusko and Casper and different artists were quite big. So that had quite a big influence on me. Like, I suddenly was like, whoa, what are these sounds? How are they making it? Got quite curious about sort of like, yeah, how are these sound made? Like, I knew a lot about music, but I was completely clueless how they made those things. So I got it. It all started with GarageBand, basically. Just had that already installed on my computer, and I would just start making little wacky electronic ideas and posting them on SoundCloud, which was, yeah, also kind of in the very early days of SoundCloud. I think, yeah, it was about 12 years ago, maybe.
And what gave you the motivation to publish what you were doing?
I think I was always quite, like I was saying, I had the YouTube channel where I was making covers of like different sort of metal songs. And I was always quite like keen. I was quite into technology. So I liked, getting into YouTube and SoundCloud sort of when it was still in its early days. It was quite exciting. And I would keep starting new bands or new projects and making Facebook. I was always quite eager to sort of like put myself out there. I feel like I wasn't shy or anything like that. I think I just liked the aspect of people listening, and I wasn't only making it for myself.
And when did Nomadic come to be?
So fast forward a few, I sort of had a break from music for a little bit, where I tried to do film. So I went to film school and wanted to be a director, and did some short films and some other creative endeavors. And I just kind of realized that filmmaking wasn't really for me. I didn't like how many people need to be involved in creating this type of art form, how much money is involved in it, how much compromise, and sort of had a bit of a breakthrough moment where I was like, music just makes much more sense for me, because I don't have to rely on anyone else but myself. And that's when I thought producing was like the way to go forward, simply because I did have some experience in bands in the past, and just like started multiple bands, and then we would get broken up because someone had a busy job or was moving away. And I didn't like that feeling that I would have to be reliant on others, and thought like I can rely on myself. So I was quite motivated, and I decided to move. That was around the age of 20, and I moved from Wellington to Amsterdam, and I studied at a school called SAE, which I think they have schools all around the world, and did some like a course on electronic music production. And yeah, I was just like living in Amsterdam. I was working in a cafe just 2-3 days a week, and the rest of the time I was just making music all every day, trying to get better. And I tried different sounds. I did some hip hop, some dubsteppy stuff, and then I got really into. At that time, I was really into Bonobo, Fortet, Nicola Cruz, a few other sort of, and they were kind of mixing in these worldly sounds and sort of blending organic with digital. I found that really fascinating and inspiring, and sort of started making music similar to that, and then decided, to call it Nomadic, and just that's kind of how it started. Yeah.
Nice. And why did you land on the word nomadic?
I'm not super happy with the name now. Like, I kind of wish I'd chosen something a bit more personal. Like, I've been considering changing to just using my own name. But at the time, I think I wanted something that like sort of went alongside with the music and was quite bold, kind of like making a bit of a statement about what it is. And I was mixing a lot of sounds from cultures all around the world that I found interesting, and liked the textures, or I liked the tones of those instruments. And so I thought it had the name Nomadic was kind of fitting, because it was like I was traveling through all these countries and kind of like getting inspired, or like, oh, this is an interesting sound, and then let's try and make a beat with this, and then just kind of like I did think it was quite fitting.
Yeah, excellent. And once you branded it, what was your first step? Because I appreciate what you said about realizing that you didn't want to be dependent on somebody else. You didn't want your success to be in somebody else's hands. So you wanted to take control and do it yourself. So the beautiful part about the computer is obviously you could do that with ease. Now, you decided, well, you studied music, you know where you're going, you've branded yourself. What were some of the first steps you took to moving forward?
It started with SoundCloud, YouTube, just uploading little tracks, sharing them mostly amongst friends. And I did get like one or two, I don't know if you remember, but maybe 5 years ago, something like that, it was a bit more popular for these YouTube channels to like promote, to be sort of like a record label, but really all they were doing was posting your song on their channel as promotion. So I did get a couple of songs. Some of my earlier ones got put out through a few different channels. There was one called French one called Le Cyclone, I think. And that was to have like that first bit of recognition, getting like an email saying, hey, I heard your song on SoundCloud or whatever. I'd love to put it on my channel. And I was like, that kind of like was that little bit of like recognition that I kind of needed, I think, to keep me motivated to do more. And then I had all these songs sort of 80% finished sitting there, and they were all in quite a similar, they had quite a similar feel. Or there was maybe about 20 songs, and I picked the 8 that I thought were the best, that fit together well. And I spent like a summer at home, staying with my parents in Golden Bay, just finishing those tunes off. And yeah, then I had my first album, and I decided to try and send it to some labels. So I thought like putting it out on Spotify myself maybe would just get lost with the thousands of tracks that get posted on there every second. So I sort of reached out to a lot of different labels, sending them like demos, seeing if they were interested. And I had a friend, well, he was someone who came from a similar area as me in Nelson, called Isaac Chambers. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he releases music on Jumpsuit Records. And
I know
I send him
Records.
the demos, and I sent him the demos, and he had been releasing music on there. And he said, I really like these tracks. I think they're really good, and showed them to the label owner, who's Polish ambassador, and he reached out to me and said, "Yeah, like really like these tracks. Let's put them out." So that's kind of how it started.
Looking back, obviously, it's easy to say that things were smooth or happened in a straight line, but I want to bring it back to reality for anybody listening or starting on their adventure. Tell me about some point in your journey that was either very difficult or a fork in the road that was a big decision point for you. That you either, obviously, the film school versus music, that's a big one, but maybe there's something else that you have yet to discuss, a point that might have been perceived as a failure or might have been a failure at the time, but helped set you up for future success.
Yeah, I think as like how I was saying earlier about having this mentality, like I don't have to rely on anyone else. I know I can do it if I only have myself to rely on. Like I had which was a very strong driving force, and sort of led me to getting where I am now. But it was very tough at some points. Like I had a very unhealthy work life. Like I would be on Ableton for maybe 14 hours without stopping, which was almost like a sort of like an obsessive, and not very. I started getting back problems. I got tinnitus as well, which was like, and dealing with, realizing that maybe that mentality wasn't the healthiest, because it also led to some periods of, feeling quite depressed when things weren't maybe going how I wanted it to go, especially more in the early days where I was putting a lot of pressure on myself, and then, things taking a lot longer than I expected them to. I thought, oh, I'll move to Amsterdam. I'll do this study. I'll have my first album out in the first year. And, I had quite high expectations. And then when those things don't work out, it's 3 years later, you're working in a cafe. You're still trying really hard to make music work. It does wear down on your mental health, I think. And so, there was definitely moments where it was very difficult to stay motivated. And the tinnitus thing was that was definitely a very low point for me, where it was quite bad in the beginning, where I got from I think it's either from producing music or listening to music for hours on end, or going to a lot of festivals. I was clubbing quite a bit in Amsterdam as well, and so not really taking care of my ears that well. And then one day I woke up and my ears were just like ringing really loudly, and it just kind of like made me quite depressed, because I was suddenly thinking, oh, this is going to affect how I produce music, like my favorite thing to do, like I thought, oh, I won't be able to hear high frequencies properly now.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
So when you wake up and you feel that now, your whole world comes crashing down mentally, at least for a moment. What strategies did you use to take care of yourself? How did you take care of your ears? Are they permanently damaged? How did you overcome that?
Yeah, so they are damaged now, but it does your brain sort of gets used to the sound, and then I don't really notice it now. So that's great. But I did start taking way more care of volume that I produce at, hours that I take breaks now. I went and got some like really high quality earplugs, like ones that they mold to your ears. So
oh, great.
Because like I did have earplugs before, but I would go out to gigs and I just didn't like how they were muffling the sound, so I would have them in for maybe 20 minutes and then I'd take them out and be like, nah, this sounds way better without. But now with the really good earplugs, it just lowers the decibels of the sound, and it doesn't really change how it sounds. So that's really nice. If I could recommend anything to people listening, is take care of your ears before there's a problem, not afterwards.
No kidding. I'm always the guy with like big orange things popping out of my ears, and my friends are like, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm like, "Dude, I want to listen to this when I'm 80."
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So,
it's important.
anyways, definitely take care of your ears. So, to that end, what were those magic earplugs that you found, or what was the brand that you can smush in your ear and it actually molds to you? Do you know?
I got it done in Amsterdam. I just got them here. It's called Ellison.
Are those in your monitors?
No, they're just
Plugs.
Yeah, just plugs. Yeah, but they're great. I sort of take them everywhere I go now, and then it's kind of because like there was a period there where I wasn't going out as well because I was like it kind of ruined the experience for me. So my friends or my girlfriend would want to go out to some parties or some gigs, and I would be like standing at the back, just being really paranoid about, is this damaging my ears? Is this too loud?
Yeah.
Not really enjoying it. And then, not going out was kind of also playing on my mental health. So, which wasn't that healthy.
Okay.
So yeah, I think coming to what you asked about earlier, for me, to be honest, moving back to New Zealand was a really good decision for my mental health, and getting away from inner city life, getting away from working as a barista, just being there's much more nature here, just a little slower pace of life, and
All right, I would love to dive into a couple of your songs and kind of understand a little bit more about your creation process and why and how you decided to create music. So we'll start with Himalaya. It sounds like you may have been to the Himalaya. Is that fair to say?
No, I haven't. I did go to India a lot as a kid, but it was more just a sort of internal image in my head as I was making it.
Nice. So you imagine the landscape and the situation and the environment, and then you can create from that perspective?
I often have like I don't do it that much anymore, but back then I would produce quite often with a sort of like a mood board of imagery, visual imagery.
Tell me about that. What's a mood board? I've never heard of this.
I think often in my tunes, what I'm trying to do is like portray like a world or a place or a landscape, or at least that's how I look at it. And sometimes for reference, I'll just get a whole lot of photos that I'll find on the internet that capture that feeling and put them together in one. And then that's kind of like a mood board. And I would kind of maybe have that up on like another monitor as I'm producing, just to like reference it and sort of have a bit of something that I can, to sort of keep that original idea alive throughout the entire producing process, because it can sometimes take so long.
Totally. And our minds wander all over the place. So, you're staring at MIDI notes for a couple hours. You're going to look up over, left or right and see those photos that remind you of what the MIDI notes are supposed to represent. So,
and like Ableton's not exactly the most inspiring interface to look at, So
especially if
you need
14 hours. Geez. That's a record in my book. I haven't heard anybody stay on Ableton longer than that. You've got your vision board, or your mood board is what you call it. And now you've got all your photos, you got the inspiration, so do you do that? You collect all those Himalaya photos before you even start making music?
I think what mostly happens is I just start playing. So I might find a sample or a melody or a little drum rhythm or something that I find interesting, inspiring, something that I'm like, this is like, has a nice quality to it. Let's explore it. And then after I've done maybe a few hours of sort of taking it into different directions, trialing some different combinations of synths or beats against this original thing that I had, then sort of the song starts to take shape. And then, so it's still quite early in the process. And then I'll be like, this is kind of like this is giving me this kind of feel. And then I'll sort of like try and hone in on it. Sometimes I do start with like a certain idea before I start making, but often it's like I just want to play, and then when something comes out of it that I think is worth pursuing, then I'll like define it a bit more. You know?
Yeah, that's great. So you kind of, well, artists, and I appreciate that you said this, you could start in multiple ways, or you can start with a mood board, or you could just start by playing and then kind of figure out the mood from whatever you're playing and hone in on it. So I like that you kind of start with an open plate and then find something and then kind of refine it, and then boom, now you're locked into this feel and this location and this time of day or temperature. You got all these emotions associated with what you're building. That's a cool way to approach it. So in that particular song, Himalaya, walk me through how you approach, after you started creating, you've created that mood board. What do you typically do? Do you build the drum beat first? Do you start with the melody? How did you build that track?
So yeah, that track was definitely one of my, I think that was kind of one of the ones that that was when I first came up with the idea of Nomadic and incorporating, I think I just at that time hadn't really heard many instruments like the kalimba, a hang drum, or a mbira, like a kora, these different like traditional instruments from different countries, and I just hadn't really heard their unique qualities, their textures. So at that time, I found them super inspiring. I think Himalaya was a sample from. At that time I was going to a lot of record stores and sampling vinyls as well. I was quite inspired by hip hop producers, producers Fortet, Bonobo, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was just this little like loop that I created from like a kalimba sound, which is sort of the main melody. I chopped it. I have a push controller for Ableton. So what I often do is import the sample and then just start messing with it. Speed it up by 5
dB.
Yeah, or transpose it up by 5 semitones.
Okay.
Speed it up, slow it down, reverse it, make slices of it, and just start like exploring like how can I take this sound that I really like, this texture, but like do it in my own way, or take it to somewhere where it wasn't before, to something like a unique place. And I think that's what I started with. And then, so that was the main little melody hook. Then I would have done the drums, which were using the push as well. So I had made a lot of my own drum kits with different samples that I would have found, drum samples from Splice, from sample packs, from Ableton, but just like picked my favorite ones and then made my own kits out of them. So made the beat. And then I think one thing that's quite interesting that I remember doing with this track was I played the bass on a bass guitar that I had, but then I just like on Ableton, you can like extract the MIDI notes from the audio. So I took that and then put it on more of like, I wanted a bit more of like a sub heavy bass, but I found when I would try and make a sub bass, whether it be from playing it in on keyboard or, creating the pattern on Ableton with my mouse and my keyboard or whatever, it just never sounded that groovy. It never sounded that natural. It never sounded that that good to me. So what I got into doing, and I've done this a lot on my tracks, is actually playing it on bass guitar and then, putting it on a different sound that's not bass guitar, because maybe I don't really like the tone of, or I think it's more interesting to have it on a different sound. Yeah, there was a keyboard solo at the end of that track, which I also made in quite an interesting way. Like, I can't play the keyboard. I'm no keyboardist. But like I can do a little bit. But that solo I had multiple layers with arpeggiators, and I was just jamming out, going wild on the keyboard, recording in these like sort of wild MIDI patterns. And then afterwards, I went through them very meticulously and just found the little licks that I liked, and then sort of made a new pattern out of it. So it's kind of like multiple arpeggiators sliced up, and then to create like what sounds like a keyboard solo, but it's actually like done in a bit of a hackery way.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you peeling back the curtain on that one and revealing how it was actually done. Because of course you never know when you listen to it how many takes it was that vocal melody came out, or whatever, or the keyboard solo. So I love the fact that you take the bass, it's more organic, playing it. You've got more like ability to do rhythm, hammers, and bends and random stuff. So you got the I like to call it the X factor. Like you've got the human factor, and then you come to a keyboard and you try and do that same thing, and it's just a little bit more stale. It just doesn't have that. So you use the instrument, which and then you take the organic analog sound, move it into the digital realm, and then you have you unlock the power of the computer on your bass, and it could become anything.
Because it's like I don't believe I could have come up with that bass line if I hadn't done it that way. Because there's something about, I would also stand up and I would loop. What I often done with my bass lines is I would loop like often in my songs there might be like a little gap before the bass comes in, like sort of mimicking a drop, a bit where the bass, it really starts to pump. So I would loop from that gap into the beat, and then just keep looping that. And then I would stand up, move around my room, just playing the bass as if I'm trying to sort of recreate that feeling of, being in a band, and your drummer is playing a little beat, your guitarist's got a little melody, and then you're trying to work out what sounds cool with it. And like, it's way more fun. And I think the results are way more interesting as well.
And when you're doing that, are you playing through an amplifier, or are you using headphones?
Headphones mostly. So because I'm not actually using the sound of the bass, I was just running it straight through my interface.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So one other question I had, and when you're doing that keyboard melody, or maybe it's applicable to that bass melody that you figured out, but when you're just kind of jamming, or in your own words, roughly, you said like trying to figure out what fits into the rest of the band. And so when you're kind of experimenting, but yet recording, because you always got to capture your ideas, how do you do that? Do you like loop a 16-bar loop and you go over it 5 times, and then you go back and listen and be like, oh, actually that chunk out of take 1 was good, but then, take another take? Yeah. Do you kind of splice in and do that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I would, like I said, I would loop it, and there's something about when you loop that I've noticed if I would just loop the drop part with the full beat and start jamming over that, it somehow this is from trial and erroring and trying different methods. It somehow came with different results than if I would include that little gap before that section comes in, because then every time I start playing over it, it's like I'm feeling what's the natural thing it should go into from that gap. Like, what sounds the coolest coming from, nothing to it coming in? Like, what sounds the most natural, rather than sometimes when you're looping a section that's maybe later on in the song, you can make something that sounds cool, but then you start playing it from the beginning and then it doesn't really lead into it that well. So yeah, I would loop that, I would play over it, and then once I'm happy with the idea, I would, yeah, like you said, just find the part that I like, and then yeah, Ableton has this great feature where you just drag it onto the MIDI track, and then it analyzes it and shows you the notes. It's with bass, it's pretty accurate. Sometimes with when I do it with guitar, it's not super accurate. It will have some notes that aren't there, or some notes that are there that shouldn't be, but I can just go in and, you know, make a few little adjustments, and it's usually pretty good.
Well, that's cool that you've developed that approach, and that you've, you know, through trial and error, as you mentioned, figured out that you need that context, that little weight, you know, that bar or two or whatever before the drop, in order to play the drop correctly, which is kind of counterintuitive when you think about it. Like if you're trying to lay down the bass line for the drop, that's what you need, just that chunk. But you're saying, no, you got to start before in order to
even
get
if
the
it's
context.
like even if it's 2 or 4 bars before, you know, it's just that feeling. Like I feel like it's, at least for me, it might be different for other people, but for me, that feeling of like, you know, when it kind of comes in, it's almost like I kind of look at those bits as the chorus, and they're like really important parts to nail, because that's almost a bit like the hook, where people go, the bass comes in and then it's like, whoa, it's starting to crank, you know. It's kind of that. Really, I don't really do, my tracks don't really have choruses, but I kind of look at those sections as like, they're the most important bits to nail.
Excellent. And so once you've nailed your bits, you know, you got all your keyboard arpeggiator riffs going, you've kind of solidified the song. How do you know when it's done? What are the signs?
As a lot of artists, I'm sure, say, it's a bit cliche, but you never really know. It's like I go on endlessly on my songs. Like I'm sure people have told me this about listening to my music, that it sounds like there was a lot of time put into it, and there was. Like I take months and weeks, and like I said, with the 14-hour days, just a lot of refining. I would so one method I would use to finish tracks off, which is maybe useful for some people, is once it's sort of getting near completion, I start exporting demos out, and I will go, I save it to Dropbox. I'll go for a walk, maybe to a park. I like doing it, getting out in nature, putting it on my headphones, going for a walk, listening to it. And then I have like a little notebook. I'll write things that pop up for me, like, oh, that, you know, when this sound came in, it was a little too loud, or it's sort of trying to drag a little bit on this section. And it's just anything that comes up, I'll write down, and I'll just keep repeating that process until I don't have much left to write on my notes. I mean, there are definitely times where there's still things niggling away at me, but I'm just like, I've been working on this song for so long, I can't stand listening to it anymore. I just got to get it out there now.
Yeah. Well, it's so important, and it's such like a balance to find, you know, when it's too rough and it's not ready, and then when it's overcooked, you know, you're going to burn the food, in the analogy.
Yeah. One more thing to add on that, like I've definitely found that the good tracks usually don't have to do that as much with it. It's usually the ones that are like, you know, maybe didn't deserve to be finished or whatever, I almost would say, like where I'm like really trying to get it to a point where I'm happy with it, but then realizing that I'm just not that happy with the song altogether, and that I just need to kind of like accept it, and that, you know, maybe my standards are quite high, and that still some people out there will enjoy listening to it. And I just, you know, I've kind of learned to let go a little bit, and just, you know, because sometimes I'll make something, I'm totally not happy with it, and I show it to someone and they love it, or the other way around. So it's like, you know, they haven't heard the song 1,000 times. They don't know quite often what goes into music producing, so they might not hear the thing that's bugging me. So yeah, sometimes it's better just to put it out and just be like, it's fine. Like, you know, I can make another song tomorrow, and like let it go.
Now, what do you do in the situation where you are not feeling creative? You sat down at your computer, you're like, all right, today's going to be a music day, let's do it. And things are just not coming, or they're not clicking, you're not creative. What do you do in a situation like that?
Yeah, probably sometimes I smoke some weed. To be honest, that sometimes gets my juices flowing if I'm really stuck. But yeah, other times going out in nature, that's definitely one. Like if I wake up and I go sit straight at the computer and try and force it, it's not really happening. And then it's often better just to like go outside, change of environment, maybe listen to, sometimes I'll go listen to some of my favorite music, some inspiring, like some of the artists that were the reason that I got into making music in the first place. That's sort of reminding me like, this is something you want to do. But yeah, it's a hard thing. It is a hard thing to force. But having said that, I have found that often if you are actually sitting down and you just start, then the inspiration comes naturally. This is kind of, I think a lot of artists have said that, like, it's sometimes not about, it's about letting the work inspire you rather than looking for the inspiration before starting work. Yeah,
that's important. And I'm grateful that you brought that up, because if you just are waiting to be inspired, you might keep waiting forever, waiting for the song to hit you,
exactly.
And then by the time it hits you, if the instrument's not in your hand, it's coming right through you. So it's interesting, the not forcing it, and then at the same time showing up and letting the inspiration have a chance, or letting you have a chance to capture that creativity.
Yeah, so. I think it depends a bit on the situation. Like if I'm working on a remix and it's gonna be released with an EP and there's sort of a bit of a timeline to it, or like I've worked on a few projects in the past where there was sort of like a deadline. Then you just got to sit down and start, and things will get moving. But for my own stuff, it's definitely, I do wait for inspiration quite often, because it is quite hard to do it for yourself when you're not really feeling it, and maybe you've been working a different job all day and you just want to come home and relax, and like finding those moments where you are inspired. Yeah.
So let's talk about another one of your tracks. There's a collaboration that O Come Ye that you just came out with. Let's talk about that. How did that one start? Obviously, collaborations are very different than solo projects. So, who started that project, and how did it come to be?
Yeah, so that one, I got an email through the record label, because the singer, I don't know how to pronounce her name properly as well, Ayla Nero, I think. She's on the label as well and has released a lot of music through there. And she had a new album that came out quite recently and had gotten some different artists, Human Experience, I think, as well, a couple other artists to do remixes. And yeah, I got the email. I had listened. I got to choose from a few different tracks. And there was one, that O Come Ye track. I really resonated with the percussion in that track to the most. Like, I also like the vocal, but there was this percussion beat going on in the background that I was like, ooh, like that straight away, like, sparked something in my ear or in my brain where I was like, I can do something with that for sure. Like, it had that to me is a bit of a signature Nomadic sound. Like, I could hear the potential of where it could be taken. And then, yeah, with that one, I didn't want to change it too much. I think that was one of my goals, is I wanted to keep what her intentions were with the song. But I just wanted to give it a bit more beef, speed it up. I made it quite a bit faster and just a bit more, I guess you could say, heavy, whilst keeping her, the same energy that she had in the track as well.
Well, I think it's so important to be able to hear the potential in anything that you're working with, especially if you had your option, they came to you with a few. Well, it's an amazing track. It sounds, to me, it sounds Celtic. I'm not sure if I'm getting that right.
Yeah, I could definitely hear that in there as well. And like, but then, I think there's definitely some parts in it that make it like, some of the synths and some of the little sound design elements, definitely like a modern with some influences from that. Like, I can talk a bit about how I would approach a remix, like sort of getting all the stems into the project, and then I will do similarly to what I do with when I'm sampling, and just sort of exploring those sounds and the audio. What does it sound like when it's sped up? What does it sound like when it's slowed down? What does it sound like, when I take that guitar and then put it onto a synth instead, or just like kind of like trying to look for some new interpretation of it, and then start adding elements, and then slowly peeling back maybe some of the stems that were there in the first place, just to keep more of maybe my sounds, and maybe remix it in a different way than how it was originally.
I like that approach, and I appreciate you walking us through the order of which you would approach things, and then ultimately the subtraction is necessary to make sure that the song sounds different than was originally sent to you. So that's cool. Well, there's definitely a bunch of other tracks I'd love to talk about. I don't know if we'll have time to get into all of them, but Monkey Business it's a very unique feel, and I would love to talk about this a little bit more. And I feel like this title is perfect because there's like just something a little fishy going on. Like the sound of it, like it's got like some mischief underlying the sound. And I'm curious, tell me about that song. How did it come to be? What was the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, so that song, it started as a collaboration, interestingly enough, I was in Amsterdam and got talking to an artist from Czechoslovakia called Kat, who was also making music on SoundCloud. It was still quite early days for me. Like I don't even think I'd made the name Nomadic yet, but I was starting to explore those sounds. And she came over to my house in Amsterdam, and we tried to collaborate on a track. But then it was very interesting, and I kind of learned a lot from it about producing with another producer, where I feel like she was there, but I was kind of doing everything. And then afterwards, I kind of finished off the track, and then she was like, I didn't feel like I contributed enough to put my name on it, so you just release it. So that was an interesting lesson about collaborating with other producers, where what I prefer doing now is collaborating with musicians. So getting people in to play an instrument, or maybe collaborating with a vocalist rather than with another producer, just because when you're both sitting next to each other on Ableton or on Logic, it's sort of like two people trying to do the same thing.
There's only one mouse.
Yeah, exactly. There's only one mouse. It's like it can work, I'm sure, but I have found it quite difficult. And perhaps the best way to do it would be through collaborating with someone, maybe even online, where you send them something, they work on it, send it back to you, you work on it, maybe something like that. But yeah, anyway, I thought I'd mention that. It's quite kind of an interesting. So that's how the song started, and it was. It was. I think we played with, or I was playing with, a lot of contact sampler instruments that I was getting quite into. Like, so I was on keyboard, and it was playing I had this sample pack it's a sampler instrument library, I guess, called Ethno World, where it's basically, instruments from all around the world, recorded in really high quality, different velocities. So when you play it on the MIDI keyboard, it does sound somewhat natural, and I can sort of go through it afterwards, and I add like little imperfections. I can add little slides. I can sort of try and make it sound more organic, when it was really me playing little melodies on the keyboard, which was both kalimba and the flute sounds. And then I think the vocal samples it was from like a YouTube video. It was something I just sampled from YouTube, like a chanting kind of video. And it just seemed to fit really well with I feel like it was one of those ones where I didn't really have an idea for the song at the start, and it started taking shape much later. Like the name Monkey Business, I think I added that right at the end, when it was coming on their album even. Like it might have been called something else before that, but it did seem very fitting.
It does. It certainly does. And I appreciate you describing the lesson that you learned as a result of that, collaboration session. And those vocal samples, that's what you got from YouTube. And were those like kids chanting? It sounds like
it was it was like a Buddhist monk. Like they were all sitting around the temple, kind of like doing this kind of crazy like chanting thing. And I I have like a plugin where I can record sound straight from my browser into as an audio file, and then I just put it over there. Yeah.
Nice. And how do you find some wild Buddhist ceremony with with chanting that fits?
I don't remember at all, to be honest, but
that's the secret sauce.
I definitely I'm quite I scour the internet for sure, and I like to get into those sort of deep pockets of YouTube where there's maybe some absurd or some to be honest, I have no idea. I might have even searched for it and heard. I think what often happens is I get a song to a certain point where I've got the riffs, I've got maybe a little solo, I've got the bass, I've got the beat, but then I'm it's kind of missing that last, sort of catchy, something that really kind of makes it its own, makes it something sort of memorable maybe on top of all those things I've made. And then I often hear a sound, or I'm like, I probably would have been like thinking some monk chanting thing would have been great over this, and then just looked it up on YouTube and maybe found something. What I would do is have the sort of similarly actually to what I was saying earlier with the bass, I would have the song looping, and I might just go exploring on the internet whilst the song's looping in the background, just start playing little videos, things I find, and then see, and then, you know, something, the music will hit and the video thing's making it sound. And then if both of them, I kind of can hear that that's like the thing I'm looking for, you know? It's like this moment where it syncs up and you're like, that's it. That's the thing right there. And then yeah.
Cool. I like that approach that you just have the loop going, and in a way you're mixing it in on the live, live production set by just hitting play on YouTube, and then you're mixing it in, and then eventually you figure out what works. That's what stays, and the rest gets rejected. All right. Dahlia is another track of yours. So this one's very chill. I feel like it's a low tempo, and I think that there's some reverse going on. Do you know if that's accurate?
Yeah, at Dahlia, there are some reverse sounds. I think I reversed some of my synths that I played. There was reverse synth sounds, some reverse hang drum sounds. I think for that song, I was inspired a lot by trip hop and sort of artists like Tosca and Massive Attack, that kind of sort of like crunchy, slowed down hip hop beat. But I thought maybe it's interesting to do that, but then in the context of sort of how I would approach it. I think that song started with the beat, I think, making it on push. And then the hangs were from like a hang drum sample pack, I think. And I just started combining them, reverse, similarly to what I was saying before, sort of exploring all the possibilities, what I could squeeze out of the audio, basically, that, you know, sounded interesting. Because what I've found when working with organic sounds like the hang drum or some of the other sounds I've used is, to me, when they sound the most interesting is when they're sort of, either slowed down or pitched up, or just like there's a sort of a quality or a texture that comes out of it that sounds maybe a little bit outer-worldly, or sounds, you know, like people don't quite recognize people's ears. You might go, oh, what is that? Like, it sounds sort of familiar, but it's a little bit different, which I find really fascinating. It had some guitar on it as well, which I don't think many people will recognize that it was guitar. It was.
Were you hand picking on that one? I've forgotten. It's not my notes, but some of your songs sound like there's like a finger picking.
Yeah. So that one, I have a electric Gibson Les Paul that I got for my 16th birthday, and I've been using it ever since. but yeah, that was just recorded straight into my interface, straight into Ableton, and then using Bias, which is like a amp emulation plugin. So yeah, I'm actually looking at. I've been using a really crap audio interface for many years, and been looking at upgrading, just so I can actually. I don't have to do so much processing to make it sound good. So that's kind of been my technique, has been recording it in maybe not the best way because I haven't been able to afford the right gear. But then making up for it with plugins, making up for it by, using tape saturation, I'm often my effects racks look really long. Lots of stuff, lots of processing just to make it not sound as dry and get it to sound a bit more interesting.
Well, that's a awesome cost-effective way of just nearly doing whatever you want. I know I invested in a synthesizer instrument that was just a piano sampled, but it was sampled like very meticulously with all the different velocities. And I believe it's like $1 million piano. So either I could pay $1 million and then probably more than that for, the land and, the studio, et cetera. And then record it myself, or I could just, spend a few dollars and now have the digital version of it. So
yeah, exactly.
I got the digital version of it, and yes, I now have a $1 million piano at my fingers.
Yeah. Is anyone really no one's going to hear the difference at the end of the day, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think I would. Maybe that says something about my ear, but regardless, there's a lot of great tools out there in the software realm. So it's important that you're using those. So on that end, or to that end, do you have any favorite plugins or VSTs that are a go-to or very commonly used?
Well, for synths, I use Omnisphere a lot. And for bass, I use Trillion a lot, which are both by the same Spectrasonics. I have also explored other soft synths and bass sounds, but I've just found that they sound the most organic almost, or like the closest to having an analog synth or an analog bass. And then for, just processing plugins, I use Valhalla Vintage Verb a lot for reverb. I've actually got Ableton over here, so I use, what else? The Fab Filter plugins, really good for mixing. Fab Filter EQ, Fab Filter Compression, Tape Saturation by Waves, J37 is that one. I also have used a bit of analog gear on a few of my tracks. So I've sold it now, but I used to have a Korg Minilog, which I was using a lot on my first two albums. And then due to space reasons and just not getting a bit sick of the sound, I ended up selling it. But
so you are a tech person. You said earlier that you're into tech. I think you mentioned previous to this recording that you are a web developer. So I'm curious, are you excited by the technologies that are coming out today? Are you looking at any of this changing landscape, NFTs, crypto, anything else that excites you in the world of music or platforms, Audius, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I say I'm a web developer, but I've been studying for 3 years and just been doing like my first freelancing job. So I'm a junior, I'm a beginner web developer. I'm not super experienced. But I'm very fascinated. I've always been fascinated by technology and computers and the internet. And, that's part of the reason I love nerding out about electronic music as well. Just, I love how things progress, how using new tools that have just come out. But yeah, I've been reading I am somewhat late, I think, to the Web3 blockchain party.
Hey, if you're there now, you're not late. I think we're at
Yeah,
the early part of the adoption curve. So
yeah, but it definitely feels like in the last 6 months things have really ramped up in terms of its sort of mainstream adaptation, or like I'm seeing it everywhere
it's
now.
less niche or less ludicrous. Yeah.
Because in the beginning, I remember hearing about Bitcoin. You're like, okay, yeah, sounds interesting, but not really having much realization of, I remember trying to watch a blockchain video 5 years ago, and it just went straight through my head. I had no clue what was going on. But then I think it was definitely with Ethereum and NFTs that I started going, wait a second, like this is quite interesting, or starting to see the future potential of it. And I think having studied web development, how the internet works, how coding works, JavaScript, all those things, has led me to be more interested in it and also be able to understand it better. So yeah, last summer, which is summer in New Zealand, so that was maybe 2 months ago, I read a book on blockchain and smart contracts, just how all that works, just to, if I am to get into something and maybe start investing my time or my money into it, I always like to know, like, I want to thoroughly know what it is before I do it. That's kind of how I approach it. So
that's great.
Yeah, been reading up on that, and I can totally see the future potential of it. I've been looking into NFTs on OpenSea and started doing Ethereum a little bit, but yeah, I haven't explored it too much, to be honest.
Yeah. Now you said something earlier, and it kind of it just sparked a question. So when you're looking at this stuff and you dive deep into it, how do you figure out, or how do you choose what sources you learn from? Because there's, you type in crypto in YouTube, I'm sure you get a million hits, and probably most of it's nonsense.
Weird.
So how did you select the book? What was the book, if it was worth sharing?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's on my Kindle.
No worries.
I would have just been researching online using Goodreads, like reviews, like maybe reading some sample. I remember reading some sample PDFs just to get a feel for, how it's written. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're totally right with the sense that I have had friends say, hey, well, so what is this thing? Can you send me a video on it? Going onto YouTube, and then just, like a lot of it feels like people are trying to scam you with their videos.
Sure.
So it is hard. But even using the official sources, like on the Ethereum website, they have a lot of good links. The book I read was quite good. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was called.
Yeah, no worries.
And
if you were exploring like a musical idea and you didn't know how to do it, is there a strategy that you use to dig up the right information?
With music, I don't do it so much anymore. Like, I think I've reached that point now where I'm trying to just get really good at what I know how to do and refining it and use, it's like, this is a lot of people's music producing journey starts with getting interested in it, watching lots of tutorials, then going on a frenzy, getting plugins and thinking you need this and that and all that. And then now it's at that point where it's about peeling back for me and trying to minimize how much tools I use and trying to like just get really good at them. But when I was, doing much more research, much more looking at tutorials, it was mostly YouTube. Like there are some really good channels on there. I used to also be signed up to some magazines. I think it was Computer Music, Future Music maybe as well.
So outside of music, what are you into?
Web development, technology, playing guitar, play quite a bit of acoustic. I mean, that is music as well. I like playing games, video games. I like to go, just like nature, getting out, going for walks. Me and my partner go on road trips around New Zealand a bit. Like I've got a van where we can sleep in the back and just kind of go around and explore. I actually don't have like that. I'm pretty like set on my, like, music kind of encompasses so much of my time that there's almost like not that much room for
no worries
for squeezing other things in there.
So what advice would you give to a musician starting out today?
What's the most important is enjoying the process. Like for me, like I was chasing, I guess, a dream a little bit, but at the same time, I just thoroughly enjoyed making the music and the producing part so much, to a point that, there wasn't really anything different for me to do. That was just all I wanted to do. So I would say, like, don't focus too much on maybe what your end goal is, and just pursue like what you're actually interested in doing right now, like in relation to music. Is this a genre you're interested in, the sound? Go explore it. Just focus on like following your interest, basically. I think is most important.
What investment have you made? It could be time or money. What investment have you made that's most improved your life?
It's not really related to music, but definitely since doing the web thing has been quite good for me, to be honest. Like I was, working in hospitality before that, and kind of stuck on the minimum wage, and not really being able to afford, much of my living costs. And now, since, getting into an industry that's maybe a little bit better paying, it also means I can afford better music equipment, and it's kind of, made things better for me in multiple areas of my life.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you work from home too, I take it?
At the moment, for just freelancing.
That's amazing. That's great.
It's been really good. It's also been hard. Like I will say that balancing something like that with music is much harder than balancing something like making coffee with music, just because I could make coffee in the morning and then come home and just do music all day, but I'm not going to do web development all day and then do music all night. Like it's too much being on the computer. You
got to get out.
Which that's been a big thing for me, getting into playing acoustic again. I bought an acoustic guitar a few months ago, and just trying to strip back, maybe working with the computer less is one of my sort of future goals as well. And maybe not sampling as much, just maybe recording myself playing acoustic and then sampling that instead of sampling from somewhere else. Trying to move. I've been challenging myself with producing without the screen turned on and just using my push. So the thing that controls Ableton, and just seeing how much I can do with just that.
Wow. So no screen at all. Record, play, loop, edit. Can you edit?
I can do it's more so in Ableton you have the session view, which is the thing where you have all the clips. So I can basically create arrangements using that. Like you can't really go into arrangement view and do editing, but you can do everything from duplicating, copying clips, deleting, editing the notes, recording, even setting in. It's really powerful, and it's been quite cool to try and incorporate it more into my workflow, so that I can move away from using the keyboard and mouse as much as possible. Really, that's kind of what I'm trying to do.
Well, I remember as a kid learning how to type. Well, there's some games and there's like letters flying at you that were asteroids. You had to type the letter fast enough before it hit you. Anyways, but then they would come up and they would cover your keyboard, so you can't see your hands. So you can't look down at the letters, because that was the point. You had to learn it and avoid being hit by a meteor. So anyways, your approach of covering your screen is kind of the opposite of that keyboard approach, but is forcing you to learn that tool at an entirely new depth.
What I noticed is that if I did have the screen, I would be too tempted to just jump on the mouse and be like, quickly fix it. Whereas now I'm like I did read the manual a while back, so I kind of know I know that there's a way to do it somehow, and I try to figure it out.
That basically brings us to the end. So I've just got a few last closing questions for you. So first of all, for everybody listening, what is the best place to reach out to you if they wanted to connect, if they want to learn more, check out your most recent tracks or anything else?
Probably through SoundCloud, I'd say. I read my SoundCloud messages when they come in, and that's probably where I'll post all my music that comes out as well. Or Instagram as well. I've got Instagram, Nomadic Music.
Final questions for you. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Yeah, just if there are fans listening to this, thank you for supporting my music and listening to it. And it's been really cool to see, some of the tracks getting some recognition, and that people, when I get the end of the year Wrapped thing on Spotify, and I can see that some people have listened to this song this many times, it's quite encouraging and humbling as well to see that. And thanks for the support.
Oh, that's beautiful. I wonder though, can you see the individual names of the people who listen to the track 102 times or whatever?
I can't remember if I can on Spotify, but I can on SoundCloud.
Okay. I just wonder, like, at what point does it get creepy that the person listens to too many songs? Because I'm one who listens to the song on repeat. So I just wonder how many artists I'm creeping out, or if they see it as,
I don't think anyone's creeped out.
Okay.
I mean, everybody has. I've got songs that I listen to on repeat. So for me, it's more just like, like I said, humbling that someone has liked my song that much. On SoundCloud, I think you can, but not on Spotify.
Okay. Whew. All right, good. All right. Well, hey, Joshua, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your strategies and your music with the world, and
no worries,
sharing your time with me. It means a lot, and I really thank you for just sharing your art, being an open book with me today. So thank you.
Yeah, you too.
You've been listening to the Freio Music Podcast with Michael Morahan. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. And don't forget to share this podcast everywhere. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay tuned.